Try that again. Welcome, everyone. I'd like to call this meeting to order. Welcome to the City Council study session. I'd like to begin with our first agenda item. This is Slate Communications. Communications Manager Alison, Carney, and Kristen Knoll from Slate Communications are present to update City Council on the 4th of July event and the creation of a signature event. Good evening.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Thank you so much for having me this evening. I'm here tonight to provide an update on planning for the July 4th event, so I have a few things to go over with you this evening. As of this date, we have 9 food vendors who are confirmed. That's a combination of those that provide snacks or desserts and actual food trucks. So some of those include M's Ice Cream, who has participated in the past, Kona Ice, who is a repeat, Snow Business, and Green Giraffe, who provides smoothies. I think all of those were at last year's event. And this year, we have Moe's Barbecue, OG Burger, Dude Bro Taco, Anointed Barbecue, and Holland Concessions. And just as a note, the Lions Club has chosen not to participate this year. It was a decision that they, I think, made several months ago. They're looking at other ways to raise money and wanted members of the Lions Club to enjoy the event this year, so they will not be participating. The Snow Business company is actually going to have 2 locations, one in Cornerstone and one in Bellevue Park. And currently that is our only vendor in Bellevue Park. For volunteers, we have staff that are working to coordinate some comp meals for all of the volunteers, and Starbucks has offered to provide a variety of sandwiches and salads, but we're still working out the details and haven't finalized that yet. As far as activity vendors, Blaster Bouncer, who has been a participant the last few years, is going to be providing a majority of the inflatable activities, and as we get closer to the event, we'll finalize exactly what those activities look like, but they will have between 7 and 8 different activities that are between $1 and $5 each. Each of these vendors are what's called pay to play, so they'll have wristbands and sell tickets for individual play or discounted tickets if kids want to, do multiple activities. Another similar activity is from Big Ball Entertainment, and they're providing one activity, which is giant, human hamster balls in water. Which I've seen at other events, and it's quite popular. So they're providing just that one activity, and I'll make sure that it's complementary to what Blaster Bouncer provides with those other inflatable activities. We obviously wouldn't have 2 of those human hamster ball activities. I have one face painter who has confirmed. She can paint 25 to 30 faces an hour and charges $5 a face. I've also put in a request for a Colorado National Guard to provide the aviation display, which would be a helicopter landing, and the ground display, which would be a Humvee, and I'm working to get confirmation that our event is approved through them, but the request was submitted over a month ago, so just waiting to hear back from them on that. As a backup, I think Air Life has provided the helicopter landing in the past, so if the Colorado National Guard isn't available, then I have the opportunity to reach out to Air Life as well. And then I just heard on Friday from Front Range Christian School, who's interested in participating to provide free games for adults and kids. They would be a paying vendor just like any of the other activities. As far as info booths is concerned, we've heard from EcoMark Solar. Again, they would pay to have a booth, and they're a local solar panel installation company who answers questions about financial and environmental benefits of solar energy, and will get people signed up if they're interested for a free home appraisal. Our musical guest and performance this year is Euphorchestra, and they're a modern funk and roots band. The band has 6 members that range from vocal to sax and trumpet and keyboard. And they have a YouTube channel, and I encourage you to take a look. They're really fun, kind of upbeat band, and they have a lot of followers on Facebook, so I think that we'll probably get some folks to the event just because of who the band is that's performing. And we've scheduled them for a 2-hour time slot, which will be from 7 to 9 p.m. in Cornerstone Park, and they will have one set break for 20 minutes or so, I think. Other on-site activities are the typical activities that are around those 2 parks, the petting zoo and the Children's Train and Pirates Cove and Colorado Journey mini golf will operate on their normal business hours just like any other day. And just a quick overview of the event schedule. Incident Command will be up and operational starting at 2 p.m. and all emergency personnel will be fully staffed by 3 p.m. The event technically starts at 3 p.m. and all vendors should be operational from 3 to 9 p.m. With the fireworks starting at 9:30, and all vendors know that they can only shut down and kind of close up shop after the fireworks show is over and the crowds start to disperse. So since we're just a little under a month away from the event, we have weekly operations meetings scheduled every week leading up to the event. So 4 operation committee meetings, and 2 of those meetings are going to be in coordination with the safety committee as well. And then all committees, both of those committees, will be meeting on site the week before July 4th to do a walkthrough on site just to make sure we're all on the same page. So I do have a couple slides of the site plan if you're at all interested in seeing those. The layout is very similar to last year with the addition of the show wagon for the musical performance and a few additional kind of info booths and activities. So I can pull those up if you're interested. Otherwise, that is my overview.
We'll take questions or comments on the 4th of July at this point. Mayor Pro Tem Rick Gillett.
Thank you for putting this together.
Microphone.
Sorry, I'm not used to this. As you know, the park is kind of split in half, but all the amenities are on one side. It used to be most of the amenities were down by the petting zoo and the train, and those seem to be all gone. So those folks aren't hardly served at all. Why have we chosen to put it all on one side?
I think a lot of it has to do with space.
There's plenty of space down there. Yeah, by the ball field. I mean, we have summer programs down there where we put a bunch of vendors and stuff. Just wanting to know why we made the decision to not use any of that space, because those folks didn't know that they had to climb the hill to go up on the other side to try to get.
What type of things did they used to have over there?
Used to have food trucks. They used to have snow cone trucks. They had
so the food trucks
cotton
would go
candy.
there?
Yeah, it's mainly stuff for kids. Bounce castles. They had all kinds of stuff for kids.
We asked about the layout this year. They said Bellevue Park was too pocketed. It's not one open area. They said there's too many small pockets that it didn't make sense, and that they said the crowds are kind of different between the 2 parks, and that the people who go to Bellevue Park are the types that bring their own grills, their coolers. They set up at 6:30 in the morning, and they are pretty self-contained. So that was the explanation they gave us this year of why it made sense.
The last time it was all set up there, we ran the vendors out. They ran out because we had people complaining that they went and they were shutting down early, leaving because they were out.
I know, like I said, Snow Business is interested in having 2 locations, one in each park. I did have one vendor who I think had been in Bellevue Park previously, and they said that it wasn't a revenue generator for them and that they did not want to be in Bellevue. So I think just talking to Parks and Rec staff with both South Suburban and Englewood, it sounded like it made the most sense to keep a majority of the activities in Cornerstone Park.
Thank you. Councilmember Yates.
I'm sorry, I didn't catch. How many food trucks will be serving this event?
So I have 9 that are signed up currently.
9, okay.
There's one more that is interested that if they get their paperwork in, we would be able to accommodate.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Martinez.
Where's the stage going to be? Is it on the Cornerstone side? Okay.
It is the Cornerstone side.
Is
Yep.
it-
Kind of over by the playground area. Oh yeah, terrible to see. Is there? So it's kind of there's a blue square that's tilted
Okay. Yeah.
that says, yeah.
So that's where the stage is?
That's where the stage is. That's where the electricity is. So that's where we're putting the show wagon.
Cool. Thank you.
Sure.
Other questions or comments regarding 4th of July? You know, I guess like Mayor Pro Tem mentioned, I would like to see a little diversity of some of the vendors. I think if possible, perhaps putting some amenities in Bellevue makes some sense. Can we move on to our second item?
The signature event. So I'm just going to give you a brief update. We've had 3 community committee meetings. The community members are mainly Broadway business owners and then some other event planning people that participate. And I have to say we've had a really good turnout to all 3 meetings. People seem really involved and wanting to participate. We're at the point now where we've thrown around enough ideas that we're kind of looking now for consensus or direction from council. It seems like the most popular opinion is to hold the event on Broadway, whether that's closing down a block of Broadway, closing down a lane of Broadway, or leaving the whole street open. But I think we were just looking for direction tonight on, are you all interested in an event on Broadway? Should we open it up and look elsewhere? And then also, we've talked about if it were to be on Broadway, it would probably be like a street fair with the vendors having their booths and tables out on the sidewalk, and then some sort of live music that night, either in a closed-off side street, in a parking lot. There was talk of having the evening on Broadway and then a concert down here in the amphitheater that night, so kind of changing locations. But I put in here the cost estimate of closing the 3400 block of South Broadway. It doesn't really make sense to close more than that, to combine 2 blocks, because then the detours can get really expensive, and then also you're limiting people's access to even get to the event. So if you do prefer to close the street, it probably would only make sense to close that 1 block.
Thank you.
So we are looking for...
A couple of quick questions.
Yeah.
One is the alternative. You were saying the stage potentially could be down here, but is it possible to have... Is there been any discussion about the stage just being on the 3400 block as well? Okay.
Yeah, maybe at one end where it's closed, or let me open this up. The other idea was maybe to do one of the side streets, which then it wouldn't detour. You wouldn't have to worry about the traffic mitigation as much, and still have the stage close
you mean
to
like
Broadway.
Lincoln or Acoma?
Yeah.
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 And then the alternative to the South Broadway or 3400 block would really be the city center here, correct?
Well, I think to still do something on Broadway, and then we had talked about doing something fun, like providing bikes that people could hop on and ride down Englewood Parkway to the concert, or the pedicabs would be available, so everybody wouldn't be getting in their cars and driving down for the show. And also, Englewood Parkway could be closed, and if we could have vendors along there, or at least along the circle here where the fountain is. So the option would be maybe to combine the 2 locations, or just keep it on Broadway.
Thank you. Open it up for questions or comments from council. Councilmember Barrett.
I think the event being on Broadway is important, and I don't think it's difficult to connect the 2. The businesses that do Final Friday were quite inventive, all on their own money, to get the Sherwood bus going, and people were just paying $5 and could ride it all night to Dead Hippie Brewing and Bob's and all over the place, and it was really the businesses did a beautiful job and made that event very successful. So I think those kind of things could tie the two in really easily. And then we've got a lot of open space between here, and then there's the oasis of nothing, and then downtown. So would be a place for vendors to be and for other activities if we wanted to expand it into that kind of tea area there. So, but I'm definitely for making sure we have it on Broadway. It's got to.
Yeah.
That's our downtown.
And luckily, it's most of those same businesses that participate in Final Friday that are on the committee, so they have a lot of great ideas. And they're really motivated.
I mean, there were lines at places. It was impressive for it just being the third one and the first one where there was no snow, and to see the entrepreneurship going in at no cost to the city, just opening it up, and those businesses doing what they do, which is creative and innovative. And they did a good job. So I imagine things like that we wouldn't even need to provide, that the businesses or the entrepreneurial guys that were running that bus, making some money that night, might be able to come on board and do something with it, but needs to include Broadway.
Councilmember Barrett, are you saying that you would like, I've certainly heard you want something on Broadway. Are you saying that you want the musical portion, though, to perhaps be at the City Center, or do you want it all sort of self-contained on Broadway?
I don't know.
Yeah, that's kind of something we should
There might be both.
Yeah,
there might be enough interest to do both. With the kind of activity that I saw going on for Final Friday, the kind of people coming out, the kind of interest going, and that's just barely hatched out of its egg, with little organization, with, just them getting together and doing their thing. So we'll see where that goes. But I think that we might be able to do both. I wouldn't discourage it, but I don't think we should be the ones putting the hammer down on anybody's creativity, especially since so far the activity that's going on downtown for that Final Friday has all been at their expense. We haven't paid anything for that. So, well, let's see what they come up with.
Thank you. Councilmember Yates?
Well, I'd be in favor of using 3400 block. Also, I'd be in favor of having the music on the 3400 block. The only thing is if we do that, then we need to make sure we shut down north and south on that 3400 block for noise and safety and so on.
Thank you. Others want to weigh in? Any questions or comments? Mayor Pro Tem?
Yeah, I'm also for having it on the block and with the music, and hopefully it can be self-contained. And maybe we can use a few little side roads to help us add more vendors. So Littleton's Welcome Week, what do they call it? Western Welcome Week. They shut everything down, and it's amazing. It's a great place to be. So hopefully we can do something like that.
Thank you. Councilmember Rolson?
I'd like to see it really pull the Broadway thing in a new way. I think it would be helpful to all of them. And I'm really glad to hear that they're so engaged and there aren't naysayers on this at all that are saying, please don't close. Please, that's great. That's a big change.
That we've all spoken to, they realize they may not do their best business that day, but that's not
it's worth
point.
it. Yeah, the good they've picked that up. That's great. So the $3,500 that's only to close the street and all of the security and everything for that and the barriers.
Well, that would be the bare minimum, since the estimate was just for a guess of what we know we might do. So that would be to close it for the signage and so traffic can know well in advance. But there could be added costs as we.
I can't remember on this one if we had. Pardon? Right. I mean, I think we want it to go really well for this first time we do it. We don't want to have anything blow up on us. But I didn't mean to say that. So what else do you think we might need to spend money for on this? Do you have a ballpark idea of what the finances of this special event will be? We approved some. No, we didn't approve specifically for this, did we?
There's money in the budget.
Well, I'm sure there is, but what's your ballpark of what you think this whole thing might be?
Well, we would have to pay for the band, and
depending on what kind you get, that could be costly.
And obviously, we want something that's going to draw a crowd. We don't want to go out with a thud. And so I think the traffic mitigation and the band would be our two biggest expenses. And there's also, we have not approached the businesses yet to talk about sponsoring parts of this, or at least matching.
Okay.
So that will be a discussion too.
Okay. So what are you thinking of a budget number right now, or?
Well, we have budgeted 10,000.
Okay, that's what did we talk about that
It
before?
might have been in.
I thought we did, yeah, but I just didn't see it here and I couldn't remember.
So
I don't
that's
like
what
our
we have, and then with possible
So
sponsorship.
that would be on top of this, right? The 3,500 plus another 10, or
No,
was that included?
that was
Okay, great, thank you, that's helpful. I'm in favor of doing this for sure.
Thank you. Councilmember Martinez?
I'm also in favor of doing it on the 3,400 block of Broadway. I'll back up a little bit.
Wow, that was so weird.
So yeah, I'm in favor, and that's throwing me off. I'm in favor. Yeah.
But there's not a strong preference of whether we decide to close it or leave partially open or leave whatever.
I think we should close it.
Oh, okay.
Do it big time and figure it out, yeah. Let's do it right.
Yeah, I think I'm hearing consensus around
Okay.
closing the 3,400 block. You know, I think I've heard some others' opinions about whether it should be totally self-contained on 3,400 or whether we should use some ancillary areas. You know, one area I think to think about would be the closure of Acoma, which we could provide, you know, that ancillary access along Broadway for pedestrians as well as along Englewood Parkway there, and kind of wrap that event quite nicely, perhaps if we closed Acoma. And I can't imagine there would be huge, you know, cost for that. But that would provide a whole host of an area. And then that could also connect you through to the pond area if we wanted to use that area as well. So that could make that all very pedestrian friendly through there. And do you have any dates in mind real quick before I turn it over to Councilmember Russell?
That was the second question. We are looking at either this fall or next spring, if there's a preference.
Thank you. Councilmember Russell?
I would like to see it on the 3,400 block of Broadway. But my question would be is if we came down Englewood Parkway with vendors, then we could come all the way to City Center, right? I mean, so that's a possibility. The question that I have is when we signed the original contract, when we talked about adding another event, did we add $10,000 to that? Or are we going to, is this going to be additional cost to the city because the contract did not include this fourth event? Or,
Slate's contract?
yes.
Yeah, that was separate. So that wouldn't be the $10,000 for this.
Okay, so if we spend $10,000 on this, we owe Slate more than
No.
also.
Slate's contract, I think it was $5,000 to help the event, but then we have $10,000 that we can put to the actual event.
Okay. But it comes out of that contract money?
No.
Or
Their $5,000
Now the total
is
budget
separate.
sounds like 15. 5 for Slate and 10 for the event.
Okay. Thank you.
Councilmember Barrett, did you have another comment?
Whether we do it down Englewood Parkway or not, ever since I've worked on Englewood Days, it is on my bucket list to close Broadway.
It is on mine. It is
So I've done 2 Englewood Days. Did the founding piece of that, and it was very difficult because it was not closed. Shortly after that, my son came off of oxygen, and I was able to take a road trip to Chicago, and all I heard was how difficult it was to close Broadway. And I went to Chicago and saw Lakeshore Drive closed for a week. The only main road, north and south, for the city of Chicago, and they closed it for a week, and I just wanted to cry. So I know how hard they worked on it then after it. The gentleman from Gothic.
Steve.
Yeah,
We call
I
him
just saw
Steve.
him. And they worked so hard on that event, but without that closing. And that may be an incentive for some. Just let them know I'm one list item closer to death. And let them know. They could
So that
close
sounds like
it.
a preference for this fall, to me. But
It is for me. I'd like to go home sooner.
I certainly like the idea of a Broadway event. Like others, I think this is kind of on my bucket list as well to have a pedestrian-only kind of block there and really highlight some of the local businesses. I do think it's kind of a long ways from the city center. I love the idea if we had a large enough event to coordinate the 3,400 all the way down to the city center. But it's a long ways. I mean, we're talking a mile stretch there, and
Farther than Western Welcome Week.
what's that?
It's not farther than Littleton.
Fair enough. I just feel like, perhaps on our first go out of the gate, I feel like that might be a little overly ambitious. Again, I think if we use Okoma, that would provide a large pedestrian-only area as well to house everything else. And I think if it expands from there and we realize, oh, we filled up Okoma, we can, sort of connect that mile, then I feel like perhaps that's next year's ambition. And again, I would like to see something happening this fall. I'm envisioning, as late as we can think of, where the weather would probably still be good, end of September, early October, certainly before Halloween is my thought.
Yeah, Steve's recommendation, Steve's not shy. His recommendation was people don't do anything at the end of August, Labor Day. They're all back to school, and then after that, like mid to late September, they're ready to come back out.
I like late September. I think that makes a lot of sense. The final issue I'll throw out there is liquor issues. I know that Eats and Beats, we had to jump through some hoops in order to be able to create a beer garden area where, beer sales were allowed in that pedestrian-only area. I don't know if council wants to sort of pursue something like that. I think that makes a lot of sense for an event like this. And so thinking and coordinating those liquor issues are kind of already at the 11th hour. So we'd really have to get on our pony on those issues.
Well, I think that's another reason why it'd be helpful to just close the one block, because it'd be so much easier to contain
the
at
liquor
those intersections.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem.
Well, why don't we just call it an Englewood's Oktoberfest? Oktoberfest starts in September.
Denver does.
They have beer gardens.
Oktoberfest makes sense around that time. I will say that Denver does a huge one downtown for like a week, and I don't know if we want to try to compete with that or have a similar theme. But
they'll do it.
Food for thought.
Englewood Fall Fest.
I love Oktoberfest.
But yeah.
It's a broad.
It's an interesting thought though. We could have a competing Oktoberfest here in Englewood.
Oh, beer's a
Big enough city.
Other thoughts on any of these issues, including liquor, dates, city center, and the 3400 block? Councilman Rolls.
I think on our first one, I'd like to pack the house on Broadway. If the businesses really think they have a sense that they could really fill it with a lot of this, I think I would hate to have it be like Eats and Beats, where we really didn't have a very large crowd for that, and then it feels like a failure, and I don't want that to happen. So, but I'd love to see it packed so that we have to expand the next year. But I bet it's going to take a couple years to build. That's what happened at Pearl Street with theirs. Took several times around, and then they have it. I'm just excited that they're willing to. So my experience with the Eats and Beats pieces was not the city's reservation, but it was the businesses didn't want to close Broadway. So there was quite an argument about that several times. So I'm glad to hear that that's resolved and ready to try something new.
Councilmember Yates.
I would prefer that we try to keep it compact and get the activity up real high in that area. The other part of it is the idea of an Oktoberfest. To me, isn't a bad idea, especially since we're going to allow some alcohol and stuff like that. People will think about that. Where a fall fest, they may or may not put the two together. Not saying that we want everybody just falling over drunk, but it's one of those things where they can come out and enjoy themselves responsibly.
Well, and I think Oktoberfest too probably isn't mutually exclusive of a family-friendly environment. I think that. Just because there's liquor doesn't mean it has to cater necessarily to an adult crowd.
I'm not saying it's just an adult event. I'm just saying that will be a part of it.
Thank you, sir. Any further comments, Councilmember Barrett?
Could you check with Littleton and how they manage that? Because I believe on the entire street you're able to go ahead and purchase something and then still walk around.
Yeah, that would be.
And I think that you just don't go off of those side streets. And no. Been here 20 years. No falling down drunk people yet at Western Welcome Week. So I don't know how they manage that, but we could work on that. And just to see if the businesses, if you would talk to Steve and see what the concerns were about Eat and Beats. There was a lot of problems coordinating with the city at that time, and it was, as was the two Englewood Days events prior to that, very successful on both sides of the street. most of the event was going on behind all of the businesses over on the Lincoln side over there, and they had the stage set up. And then when you divide something like that and make it very difficult for people to get across the street, it was successful enough that it was worthwhile to keep trying to do it. I remember, though, that the businesses were extremely frustrated with trying to work with the city, and they were paying for it. They put out a lot of money for that. And so where that cooperation is, where they thought they had problems with us, if you could get some of that feedback and we can honestly take the feedback without being sensitive and just find out from their perspective what it was that they thought diminished that event, aside from that Broadway wasn't closed, that we might be able to partner with them better now. I'd appreciate that, because those events were successful. They just weren't near as successful as they could have been, not even close. So we will see. Thanks.
Thank you. Councilmember Rolson?
So the Oktoberfest this year for 2017, have you looked at the dates for Denver's? Because it's the 22nd, 23rd of September, and the 29th and 30th, so it's not even in October. Because I think that probably anticipates the cold weather we might get. Yeah. So I don't think we would want to do it on the same time and call it an Oktoberfest. I think that I wouldn't want to set us up for that either, but that's what it is this next year, those 2 weekends.
Why don't you put that issue maybe to the to the group here and see if they come forward with a recommendation of Oktoberfest, at different times from Denver's, or some sort of more generic language, at a similar date or different date.
Preempt them with the 15th, 16th.
There you go. Yeah, maybe we get it out for sooner, quicker. Really exciting stuff. Any final comments on the events?
I am not either.
Seeing none, thank you for being here tonight.
Thank you.
And great job on the state of the city. Thank you again. Moving forward, we're going to have to pick up a little bit of time here. Monthly financial review. Our Finance and Administrative Services Director, Kathleen Rinkel, is here to review the regular monthly financial report with City Council. Good evening, Director Rinkel.
Good evening. Get my voice back here. Kind of goes in and out. I apologize. So I'd like to go through the financials for the month of April. And what we have is we have the full comprehensive format this month. There are some changes in it, and some of the data has stayed the same from the last comprehensive because it compares like 17 budget to 17 expected, and that hasn't changed. So on the very first page, what I'd like to do is say that our year-to-date revenues exceed our year-to-date expenses by about $1.8 million. Excuse me, that's $500,000 better than the prior year at this time. On page 2, I'd like to point to the general fund expenditures. We're at 30.3% spent. Last year, we were at 30.1% spent. So we're on target to meet our budget in both expense and revenue based on what we've reviewed. And so far, we're following the same patterns as we have last year. On page 3, what I'd like to point out is Area 7. Area 7 has been our contributor to our good fortune this year. At this point, we've got almost $27,000 that we've collected. Or it's different from year to date, I'm sorry, from last year to this year. And that's 20.5% higher. The next area that we've changed that I'd like to point out is, it's throughout the package, but very visible on page 7. We've adjusted the scales on the graphs to hopefully give you a little better view of the different bars and how quickly they've changed. Please let...
Sorry, can you do that on page 4, too?
4? Okay. We can do it on page 4.
I saw that. I was
We
like,
thought we caught them all. We thought we caught them all.
page
We'll
4.
do that, page 4.
But no, good job on the others.
Okay, cool. The next visual I'd like to give you on the sales and use taxes on page 9. where you can see the area 7 bar so much farther above the rest of the changes. The next big change in the package, if it's a big one, I'll get to my clip here, is on page 17. What I'd like to point out is the year-to-date April change between 16 and 17. We've got the salaries have gone up a little bit, and yet our contractual expenses have gone down. So we're looking at year-to-date April of 16 total at 13.4, and we're only at 13.6, and that's with salary increases and everything else. So I think we're holding pretty steady to what we did last year. And then the last area I'd like to point out is on page 24, in looking at the, I'm going to say middle of the page, where we have the expenditures in the 2017 column. You'll notice that all the departments are on target for percent of budget spent. We've completed 33.3% of the year through April, and you'll notice that all of them are right about there or a little bit less, except for the city manager office. And they're actually really on target because what happens there is it's got the fire contract, which we pay a month in advance, so there's an extra month of expense in there. If you take that out, they're right at 33%. So all in all, on target. I would say we're looking good to complete the budget this year on target and within expenses and revenues both. Any questions?
Open it up for questions or comments from City Council. Councilmember Russell.
I do have one question. If we are following the same pattern as last year, does that mean in June of 2018 we're going to have to appropriate more money if we're following the same pattern?
Those were, it's to be determined. I would say at this point each area is within budget. So if I were to base it on today's actuals, I would say no.
Okay.
Because last year what we did was we had some areas that were under and some areas that were over that we had shuffled folks around. At this point, none of that has happened.
Okay. I just want to make sure that we are looking at this like we are right now and we address it. When we get to the point that we're starting to go over, I want to cut spending instead of next June having to make a supplemental appropriation. So, I mean, this is kind of the same thing that we did last year also. I have a couple other questions. On page 2 where it says the estimated 2017 year-end combined unassigned and ladder fund balance is $9,563,171. At what point are we going to be able to separate the unassigned fund from the ladder fund? Or are we intending to keep them together to come up with the money that we need?
At this point, our forecast has them together. We are working on a plan to try and get there. We don't have the plan in place yet.
Okay. So the bottom line is the ladder fund is not available funds for us to use at all because we need it. That's why it's connected to the unassigned.
Fund balance. At this point, we are above our required holdings, so there is some of it that would be available, but it does hold the majority of the funding.
Okay. Then on page 14, where it talks about general fund expenditures, and this is the first time I've seen this. I know we've kind of talked about it, but not totally. It says under general fund expenditures in 2017, the city began the implementation of budgeting for community goals and will incorporate these principles in the development of the 2018 budget. Then it says, down a little farther in that paragraph, the budgeting for community goals approach will help us develop a strategic budget that both reflects our community values and ensures that residents will continue to receive a high level of city services. The budget focus changes from a department or line item methodology to a program-based approach. How are we going to do this without a line item? We still have to have line item expenses or you can't keep track of the budget.
We will change the focus to look at the programs first, and the line items will be within the programs. We aren't getting rid of line items. They're always there.
Okay, that's what I thought. That's not what it sounds like. But another thing that is very frustrating to me is that we moved from priority-based budgeting to this, and there was no discussion with council that we were going to do this. It is very frustrating to me to see that we didn't get answers, didn't get information back then, and now we're moving on with the next one, and we don't even know how the first one worked.
And it's the same. It's actually the same process. It's just renaming. And what we're doing is looking at the individual programs because they were identified at such a low level that when you looked at them, it was hard to see exactly what the impact was. So what we're doing is kind of rolling them up into a grouping. We'll still have the detail, but we'll be able to group it and say, okay, it's this function, this program. So it is the same process. We've just renamed it, actually.
I think Manager Keck might have an additional comment.
And that's exactly right. I think Ms. Rinkel just covered the point. I think, with all due respect, I understand the frustration, and I think it would have been helpful if, in fact, this council, City Council today, would have been the council that went through the original process. I think it would have given you a lot more context of what we're trying to do. I think that the focus, the language that talks about moving away from line item detail will always be present. You have to have that. You're exactly right. But it's to get us away from focusing on how many pencils is the city manager's office buying or how many trucks is the public works buying. It's more to look at, are we meeting the community's desires or priorities for safety, for development, for economic development and growth and those types of things. And so as we start to get into the next phase of the budgeting process after all the departments have presented, we're going to pull out the resource alignment diagnostic tool, which is from the Center for Priority-Based Budgeting. That'll help you to see where those lower performing programs are and how we can cut those back and reallocate and mine for that money to move it to these other programs that may be more salient or more important to the community and to the council. So you're going to get into that. I appreciate that you continue to bring that up. I think that we did discuss before that this was just a nomenclature change. It's nothing to do with moving away from priority-based budgeting because that is the source of the methodology that we're using.
Okay, then I'm going to share with you one thing that needs to be addressed. I cannot tell you how many calls I have gotten about the rat infestation in this city, and that is going to become very dangerous at some point. That's really why the Black Plague developed in Europe years ago. It was the rats that were carrying it. And if we don't address the safety issue, people have told me they've called code enforcement, and code enforcement says to them, it's not our problem, it's your problem. It's going to become the city's problem, and we have got to have money to address the police needs and those types of things.
Understood, and I think anecdotal issues like that brought up tonight, I'd like to get some more context upon, but I think it's something that if we knew specifically where these are emanating from, we can zero in on it and figure out a program that would be mutually city and resident and businesses to attack. Yeah, I have not heard about that. I've read next door talk more about rats in Littleton than in Englewood.
It also has to do, I think, with some of the council requests regarding the dumpsters and things outside some of the multifamily. I think that is being referenced there as well. Let's move on to Councilmember Barrett.
It was in the newspaper that Colorado, Denver is listed as the fifth in line for having the worst problems with rats. So that's not some imagined problem on the part of our citizens, but nonetheless, that's not about the budget for me. So what City Manager Keck said about, he regrets that we weren't part of the other council so that we would understand that it's more about programs and not counting pencils or how much toilet paper the rec center has. That's been a theme, whether it's outcome-based budgeting or priority-based budgeting or goals. I think what I picked up on, Councilmember Russell alluded to as well, was you said right here in 2017, I was here for 2017, you're implementing budgeting for the community goals, that it's changing. And then every time we say anything about it, when we asked as we came on, and now we're going into 2 years here, we asked for the information about the priority-based budgeting, and then it changed. And then you say, no, it's really the same thing with a different name. And then you write down here, in 2017, the city began the implementation of a new budgeting process. So it doesn't say we enhanced priority-based budgeting. It says you're doing something different, and that does end up getting somewhat confusing on how you're handling that. The budget focus before was not on line item. I've never been on this council nor participated in anything with this city where the focus has been on the line item. It's been on departments, programs, but none of the institution of any of the budgeting processes we've done has lent itself to ever. I asked for a line item budget in 2003. We weren't doing it then either. So actually, we've never had a focus on a line item budget, and either by department or whatever it's been called, whatever new thing it's been called. I think Councilmember Russell understands, as I do, that it isn't possible to do a budget unless you know how many pencils and how much toilet paper you're buying. That all has to come. I do understand what City Manager Keck is saying, and that's that the priorities of what the citizens want, what they think is working for departments, that piece has to come. But that comes first. Mm-hmm. Then how many pencils we need to make that happen in toilet paper, and the line item happens. And then in a monthly financial report like this, then we get the information of how are we doing on the original expectation of the community, how many pencils and toilet paper rolls it took to make that happen, and whether we were on target for that. And that's the piece that we need to focus on in this. So I do need in these monthly reports for it to be a line item issue so that we know how that program, how that budget is doing for that department in meeting the goals that we addressed and identified for the community. So I think we're trying to keep going backwards. We're in the weeds now where the money is being spent. The goals and the objectives have already been made. Pencils have already been counted. Everybody's put their budget in, and we're just trying to find out how they're doing as we're going along so that we can make necessary assessments and changes as we're going along. I know we're going into the 2018 budgeting process. That's a different process. We're trying to see now again for 2018 what the goals of the community are, what they would like to see. But we're not able to do that very well unless we're able to tell them how those departments are running. So I would just, the way that it got put in there is confusing. If you want to say that we're still doing priority-based budgeting and this is an add-on to it, that's not what it says. So if we could try and remember that at this point of it, maybe not for the budgeting process of it, but for the monthly assessment of where we are financially, we need to have that kind of focus.
We'll work on that.
Thank you. Councilmember Yates.
Just have a couple of quick statements. It's meant for the public that's listening. The rat issue is a regional issue. It's something not just Englewood's having issues with. It's all over the metropolitan area. When it comes to the plague, it wasn't necessarily just the rats that caused it. It was used as a biological weapon. They were catapulting dead bodies that had the bacteria or the plague on it. So Englewood coming down with the plague, I think, is fairly slim on that. We also are a much cleaner community than it used to be in the medieval times. When it comes to priority-based budgeting versus community-based goals, we had several discussions on that, and it was pretty clear that that all we were doing is trying to match the name up to something that was a little bit more understandable for the community of what we were trying to accomplish. When it comes to, does the city know how many rolls of toilet paper? Yeah, they know how many rolls of toilet paper. They know what they're spending on janitorial goods. Now, is it really something that council needs to be counting rolls of toilet paper? No. We need to be looking at bigger pictures other than, how many rolls goes to that bathroom.
And just point of clarification, Mayor, too, I think that lest nobody leave this room thinking that we don't have transparency tools that, I'm sorry,
Oh, I just wanted to make sure. I had a second point.
Come back to you. Let's
Okay.
just let Manager
Wanted to
Peck
make
finish
sure.
up.
Thank you.
Again, that we have transparency tools, OpenGov, the portal does show and allow people to ratchet down and look at detailed level, and we appreciate the fact that Lorette Barentine and Rita Russell have brought that up, and since then we've enhanced that tool to allow the public to look at that as well. And that's a tool not just for the public, that's a tool internally. I mean, I use that on a daily basis myself, just to look at the performance of the city and how we're doing, economically with spending as well as revenue.
Thank you. Councilmember Barrington?
Oh, I'm not taking away from that. And the renaming of it, if you think that it's just a name that better suits what we're doing, then when you tell people that we just implemented it, that's not accurate either. So it just makes it a little confusing, and that's exactly what I said. We used to have a squirrel. I loved my poor little son on oxygen, and I had a squirrel come up to the door all the time. Used to feed him. I thought it was really freaking cute until the plague came again in Colorado, and we had an outbreak of it. Deer and little mice were carrying it around, and I stopped feeding those squirrels at my porch because I don't want to be the mom who killed off her son by feeding squirrels there. So those things are not taken lightly by our community. They happen. We're not talking Middle Ages and tin hat kind of theories here. These are health issue, very serious health concerns and issues that once an outbreak happens, everybody looks at the city and goes, why in the world weren't you doing something? Only takes one person dying before everybody's pointing a finger going, what in the heck were you people thinking? On page 14, the general fund expenditures, I think it was, wait a second, let me see here. Oh, on page 18, I apologize. I got all worked up about the plague now.
Sorry.
Settle down. Seeing fewer squirrels, maybe people are getting it. When you're talking about the general fund balance and the revenue exceeding expenditures in our capital improvement budget, and that there isn't any, we're not estimated to have any excess revenues to go ahead and put into the capital funds project. It just was weirded in such an odd way that when the revenues exceed the expenditures, and that in the past excess funds, I don't know when there's been excess funds that were transferred over. I would like to know when the last time that was. And then you kind of switched the verbiage on it and said the estimated unassigned fund balance isn't adequate. So if we could get a better explanation of kind of what you mean by that.
So I can speak to last year when we were able to budget where we had, I should say, excess of need for about $1.5 million that we were able to transfer into capital funds. So we did have a transfer last year where we were able to do that. This year we're estimating only $86,000 between our revenues and our expenditures as extra. So if that's what we meet, that $86,000 would definitely go into fund balance. But it's a very small margin at this point, and we're early in the year, so we're not sure we'll be real close to that or not.
Thank you.
Did that answer the question?
Well, I don't understand why the capital improvements fund it's making it sound as if it's dependent on excess revenues coming in.
Well, it helps. We do have a
Well,
source of revenue for of course. We do have a source of revenue for the capital funds, and that's with the vehicle tax stuff that we get. There's that, and I'd have to look at the other pieces. I don't have them at the tip of my fingers here, but we do have a source of revenue that just funds capital. It ends up being between $3 and $4 million a year, and then we add to it if we can.
Okay, but what you wrote is the estimated unassigned fund balance is not adequate to provide that transfer, when the sentence before says the fund balance is normally built up when revenues exceed expenditures. But, okay, never mind. I'll take
Well, the revenues are only going to exceed expenditures by 86 if we come right in on budget. And that's why we're saying there's really not enough there to transfer in.
Not if we get the budget that got voted on. Thanks.
Thank you. I'll also point out that, we are substantially over our policy for reserves, and so there is some potential, I suppose, to reallocate those funding if the council were to make that decision. So any further comments on the monthly financial review? Seeing none, I'm going to move us on to our third agenda item. This is the Englewood Urban Renewal Authority discussion. The Community Development Director Brad Power is present to discuss the Englewood Urban Renewal Authority. Good evening, sir.
Good evening, Mayor, members of council. Brief introduction, and then I'll turn it over for your discussion. You'll recall last year during the discussions and the transaction that was completed between the Urban Renewal Authority and Medici Communities for the Broadway Oktoberfest Lofts project, council had a study session discussion around the continuance of the Urban Renewal Authority as the city's public redevelopment agency. We don't remember any consensus that was derived from that discussion at that point in time. So we thought it was timely to bring that back to you for discussion this evening and possible direction around the continuation of that as the city's Urban Renewal Authority.
Thank you.
I should mention that Bernie Costello, the chair of the EURA, is also here as well.
Thank you for joining us, sir. If you have anything to add, feel free to come join us at the table here. My thought is this is probably a substantial council discussion. There has been some discussion amongst this council about discussing the future of the Urban Renewal Authority. I'd love to come to some consensus tonight on direction to, put that issue to bed or to begin the process of the dissolution of the Urban Renewal Authority. Councilmember Yates.
Well, there was never a consensus for us to even talk about removing it. There's just a couple of council members that's their wishes. So at this point in time, without a consensus, I don't understand why this is on the table tonight.
This has been substantial conversations for several council members as well as the Urban Renewal Authority body along with city staff. Again, my thought is at their city manager or mayor manager meeting, we decided to put this on the agenda to try to get council direction one way or another and have some firm direction so that we know where we're going and that this issue doesn't kind of remain flailing out there.
Well, the reason that those discussions were going on is because a couple of people were very boisterous, a couple of council members, and the others are nervous about it, and then
I think we were lacking clear consensus one way or another, either to move forward with the dissolution or a firm statement saying we're comfortable exactly where we are. And so hopefully we can get one of those two.
At this point in time, why don't we do a quick little straw poll here?
That's what I'm hoping for.
Without going through all the discussions. I am not in favor of getting rid of EURA.
Thank you, sir. Councilmember Barrett.
If you go back and look at a memo that was written by our city manager, after he was made aware that we did have a TIF area, and he had a meeting with Corbin Sackdahl, who was our then county assessor. He came back.
Point of order. The question is do we want to go ahead and have this discussion, or do we want to just do a straw poll right now to find out if we're going to have the discussion?
Yeah. And I think this is the beginning of this conversation, sir, with all due respect. I think, Councilmember Barrentine is going to hopefully get us relatively quickly to her position so that we can gain consensus.
As quickly as Mr. Yates did, yes, I will.
Thank you, ma'am.
So where was I? Oh, our city manager wrote a memo that said that he would advise us to go ahead and dissolve EURA, to have the discussion. That's from back last August. And you can get a copy of that. It wasn't just a couple of irate council members who want to see urban renewal go away. It was a process of this council and the council liaisons who sit on the Urban Renewal Authority, our staff, and the Urban Renewal Authority, not knowing the effect that urban renewal was having, that we had a TIF area, that we had issues that were facing this city that needed to be found out. We sat here, and we had the mayor and the city manager said that there was no way that the county assessor knew more about the city than they did. Turned out that he was right. Corbin Sackdahl was correct. We had a TIF area. We needed to deal with it. And in going to that meeting with Corbin Sackdahl, our city manager gave us a memo that said he would recommend that we close the Urban Renewal Authority down, that we consider that, along with closing the urban renewal plan area down, along with us having a discussion on what urban renewal really is, and that it is not, per the law, a redevelopment tool, We have a community development department for that, along with zoning, and a comp plan that does redevelopment, along with the council. Not the Urban Renewal Authority, who has police powers and eminent domain and condemnation. It is by state statute, not their job. That's not what they're formed for. So that's why we were looking at it. So I disagree with the contention. I mean, I've just recently looked at your memo again from what you had said and advised this council that it may be in our best interest to close the Urban Renewal Authority down and reissue a new Urban Renewal Authority when, as the law permits, we should find some blight and slum that needs to be addressed under the police powers of an Urban Renewal Authority with the 25 signatures, and then it gets brought to council and we do a plan. And when that plan happens, we would have to have a new board anyway.
Quickly about this.
Hopefully you've heard any of it.
Thank you. And I'm hearing there that you would support dissolution or moving towards dissolution at this time. I think City Manager Keck would like to make a comment. I'll move on to Councilmember Russell.
Yeah, just as a point of clarification, Ms. Barrentine is correct about the memorandum. However, my recommendation wasn't to shut the authority down. It was to shut the project area down, the Englewood Ironworks project area. I do share the concerns about the increment generation. I learned a lot from Corbin Sackdahl and his right-hand deputy, chief deputy there on that, with respect to if, in fact, increment was generated, would need to be rebated back because we have no public projects in that area. But, again, just to clarify, I did not stipulate that we should shut the authority down. It was just the project area.
It was one of the options.
Right.
There were two options there. It's specifically stated on there that we can close it down. It is what it's written. I'm not making it up.
Fair enough. I'd like to move on to Councilmember Russell.
Actually, what I would like to do before we even move on with this discussion, I think probably we should table it for a future study session, is have the city attorney look at Colorado state law and see, I mean, according to my opinion, if there is no plan and no project area, state law says we cannot have an urban renewal authority, and it's pointless for us to spend any more time discussing this until we have our city attorney look at the law.
Before we move on to Councilmember Olson, can anybody address that issue? Councilmember Olson?
So, city attorney, was that a no? You can't. Okay. So, barring that being true, my vote would be to keep it going. If it is true, then obviously that's what we should be doing then. So I just think we spend way too much time trying to figure these things out. It's a waste of time. I read your memo just as you suggested, and I think we have some opportunity here. I don't see any reason to close it down unless indeed we're not supposed to be having it. I think there's some things yet to be done, but we haven't really had the conversation, so I prefer to keep it open until we find out we should close it.
Mayor Pro Tem Gillett?
Until we get clarity, otherwise, I would prefer to keep it open.
Thank you. I'm kind of in that same boat. I think we need to get a clear answer to the issue that's been raised by Councilmember Russell. Perhaps that can go in as a council request to the city attorney's office so that we can get clarity on that. Until we get an answer to that question, I don't see a lot of benefit to, winding down the Urban Renewal Authority. Only real administrative costs, and the exact opposite is true. I think of keeping it is that there is some potential benefits at no cost, and so in my mind, I would also like to keep the urban renewal afloat. In my mind, this is a tool that is appropriate for certain circumstances. If and when that circumstance arises, it's there for our use. Any further comments on this issue? I'm going to suggest for the time being we have consensus to keep the Urban Renewal Authority pending a council request to the city attorney's office with the question from Councilmember Russell. Sir.
Mayor, I'd just like to interject. We do have scheduled on July 24th a study session to talk specifically about the Ironworks area and the continuation of that as an urban renewal district. So that will be coming back to you in July.
Thank you. Further comments or questions regarding this issue? If not, I'd like to move us on to the fourth agenda item. This is the 2015 Building Code Review. Our Chief Building Official, Karen Montanez, will be here to discuss the 2015 code adoption. Good evening. I apologize. I know we're running a little behind here.
Only 2 minutes?
Yeah. Yeah.
Good evening, Mayor, Council. I'm here this evening to present.
Might need it a little closer, just for people that are listening in. Closer.
There you go.
There
How's
you go.
that? I'm here tonight to present the 2015 International Code adoption. The proposed codes are the 2015 International Building Code, Residential Code, Plumbing Code, Mechanical Code, Fuel Gas Code, Existing Building Code, and Energy Conservation Code. I'll give you a brief history of building codes in Englewood. The City of Englewood has enforced the building code since 1943. Prior to 2007, the city adopted amended versions of the Uniform Model Codes. In 2000, the three model codes in the United States combined to form the International Model Codes. The southern part of the United States had their own building codes, the Northeast had their own, and then the West had their own. So they combined so that it was pretty much universal. In 2007, Englewood adopted the 2006 International Codes, and in 2012, Englewood adopted the 2012 codes. The Building Division is proposing to adopt the 2015 International Codes. Adoption of the most recent codes cycle will keep Englewood current with building safety and technology, as well as help create consistency with surrounding jurisdictions. Also, it will help when we do our ISO ratings if we're with the most current codes. Just as a note, the proposed codes are not a retroactive code. Just some of the area jurisdictions that are under the 2015 International Codes include Arapahoe County, Aurora, Centennial, Cherry Hills, Commerce City, Denver, Douglas County, Golden, Longmont, Parker, etc. And then there are several that are in the process of adopting the codes. A little bit about the code adoption process at the national level. The international codes are kept up to date through the review of proposed changes that are submitted by code enforcement official, industry representatives, design professionals, etc. The proposed changes to the codes are presented and considered by various committees and presented to the membership for a vote. It's much like the legislative process, in that you start at the bottom, kind of work your way up, and everybody votes on it. During the code development process, each committee reviews the proposed changes, seeking to ensure that the changes are consistent throughout all of the codes. All interested and affected parties may participate in the process, starting at the local level and moving on up to the national level. Just as a side note, if there's any errors that are found in the codes, the code comes out with an errata so that it will address any of those. And through our ordinances, we will also adopt those erratas. Just a few examples of the national updates to the 2015 codes. There is the modification of I-1 and I-2 occupancies. This is institutional occupancies such as hospitals, nursing homes, etc. As our citizens are aging, the nursing home facilities are changing a lot, and the code has set up to address that. Currently, there are two categories in the I-1, that for those people needing very little assistance and those that would need some assistance. And then for those people needing assistance, they put limitations as story limits, smoke barriers, sprinklers, etc., to help those people. And then the I-2 occupancies are for nursing homes and hospitals. And so they've kind of split those out to allow more design options. There's also a modification of private garage floor areas. Currently, the maximum is 1,000 square feet. However, they've come up with a system so that you could have more 1,000 square feet private garages in one building, but you separate those by firewalls. So once again, more design options. There's also a a change in the code to modify the threshold for alarm systems in Group E occupancies. This would be your schools. It's kind of funny because in 2009, the limit was 50. In the 2012 code, it went to 30. And in the 2015, it goes back to 50. And it's because they realized that they had made a further restriction that really didn't make any sense. It was a restriction that had no visible benefit. So they upped it back up to 50 occupants. There's also a change in the residential code as far as habitable rooms and the sizes. It used to be 120 square feet was the max or the minimum that you had to have for at least one room in a home. That's gone down to 70. And that's just to give people that option that want to have kind of a smaller footprint, so to speak, to have that option. It also allows for micro apartments and things of that nature. So also think of tiny houses. With the adoption, they also added a requirement for storm shelters serving Group E occupancies, educational occupancies. I put this one in here even though it doesn't necessarily address Englewood, but it just shows how the codes change. And this was in reaction to the tornado that hit in Oklahoma and was a direct hit on the school. So in tornado-prone areas, they are asking or requiring that there's storm shelters. There's also the added potential requirement for sprinkler systems in small Group A fire areas when sharing a common means of egress. So this would be for your bars and restaurants and small assembly areas, say in a building that's on one level and you have multiple units, but they all exit out of the same area. So this would actually add all those occupants together, and then that would determine whether a sprinkler would be required or not. There's another section that's been added to address requirements and limits for rooftop-mounted photovoltaic systems. That's a mouthful. Basically, all it does is require that on residential occupancies that they be listed systems, and this is just to be consistent with the International Building Code. Another requirement which would be found in the mechanical code is adding a requirement for door clearances to vent terminals. So this would just be one of, think of, you have a dryer vent terminal coming out, you have a door. This would just be so that the door doesn't hit the vent, damage it, and then cause problems. So now that it's 12 inches away. So these are just kind of examples of different code things that come up and get adopted. Another requirement is the removal of a requirement that guard height be measured from the surface of adjacent seating. So think of decks. You see many decks that are, they have the built-in seating. So you sit down, you think nothing of it. Well, there was a code requirement that suddenly came along that said that you had to have a guardrail above that seating. The theory being that a child would climb up there and fall over. It didn't address the fact that any loose seating that you had, they could do the same thing. So they took that requirement out because it just didn't make any sense. Also have a brief overview of the City of Englewood amendments. These are very general in nature. They're more administrative. For example, amending the work exempt from permits section. The code exempts fencing and sheds. However, the city municipal code does require permits, so we are amending that exemption out. We are also amending the fee section to reflect the City of Englewood fee structure. We are amending the section regarding the Board of Appeals to be consistent with the Englewood Municipal Code. We are deleting the requirement for fire sprinkler systems in 1- and 2-family homes. This is consistent with the surrounding jurisdictions, as you know. It doesn't mean that you can't put it in, so a homeowner or developer can always opt to install sprinkler systems, but it is no longer required. Another amendment we are proposing is with the International Mechanical Code to require guardrails on roofs for service and replacement of equipment. This wouldn't be on residential occupancies. In the 2012, the code reads a certain way. In the 2015, they amended it, but they realized that it wasn't a good amendment, and in the 2018, they're actually going back to the original wording. So it just provides more protection for service workers. And so in conclusion, the City of Englewood Building Division staff has been taking classes in preparation of adoption and has reviewed the codes and supports the adoption of the 2015 code cycle. Upon Council's direction, staff would like to bring the ordinances forward on June 19th for a first reading. At this point, any questions?
Questions from Council? Councilmember Russell.
Is this regarding the International Fire Code or the International Building Codes?
These are just the building code. As I said, building, residential, et cetera. This does not include the fire code.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Barrett.
I guess the reason that question comes up was because an issue that came up as a legal issue last time is in here in parentheses and quotes here. I mean, and I was concerned then why it was in here, to make it very clear to us that we cannot adopt a code or an amendment that isn't approved by the Denver.
Right.
That was decided on by our attorney last time. That's the same paragraph, isn't it, that was discussed last time?
It's a little bit different.
It's the same agreement, though, with the same people?
It's the same IGA, and
okay.
Denver has been sent these amendments. The only two that would be different would be the sprinklers, which Denver has also amended out, and well,
then that would be with the fire chief's approval,
correct,
because he has that. What my confusion was is that it was being included in here, and that we had a different, I thought, a legal opinion last time on this.
It's the same paragraph, and I don't have the Denver IGA in front of me, but it's the same paragraph, but it's a different sentence. The issue that came up last time was the fire chief was concerned that by contract, by IGA, that the city council was mandated to adopt all of the amendments that Denver had adopted. And the language doesn't require that. The issue here is, the secondary issue is, if Englewood selects amendments that Denver has not selected, do they have to go back to Denver and the Denver fire chief for approval? The language is kind of vague, and what it says is if there are amendments that will have I think it's like a negative impact, then they have to go back. So it doesn't say who decides if it's a negative impact or not a negative impact. The building official, just in the interest of making sure that we were doing our best to conform, she went ahead and sent those over to the fire chief. Has he even responded?
No. I did ask that we get a response prior to the 19th.
Okay. I can only address what was given to council and why this was included, and that's exactly what I was asking, was why it was included if that's not what we're bound by. What's written here and was given to me. So, okay. Just was asking.
But as
why.
I said, they have been sent this information for their review.
Thank you. Further questions or comments? Seeing none, this will be coming back. When did you say again?
I was hoping for the 19th with our ordinance.
Great. Thank you so much. And I think with that, we're going to go ahead and conclude our study session and pick this up next door at 7 o'clock. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.